Old Hollywood sold the cowboy as pure American certainty. Broad shoulders, square jaw, no fear, no doubt. But behind studio gates, that image was often a performance under pressure. For some Western stars, one rumor could wreck contracts, publicity, and an entire identity overnight. Tonight, we're looking at 10 macho icons whose private lives were whispered about, concealed, managed, or only understood much later. Before we start, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Rock Hudson. He was sold as towering, handsome, and almost mythically secure, the kind of star who made masculinity look effortless. Universal turned him into one of the defining leading men of the 1950s and 1960s, and later television kept that image alive through Macmillan and Wife. But the deeper drama was off-screen. Hudson was gay, something many people inside the industry reportedly understood, even while the public was fed a carefully managed bachelor image. Later accounts described arranged dates, publicity pairings, and studio protection meant to keep his romantic image commercially safe. In that sense, Hudson was not just hiding, he was being professionally maintained. Then the mask cracked. In 1984, he was diagnosed with AIDS, and in 1985, his illness became public, making him one of the first major American celebrities whose diagnosis forced the country to confront both the epidemic and the cruelty of silence around it. The shock was enormous because his screen identity had been so carefully built. That is what makes his story so devastating. The cowboy-style strength Hollywood sold in photos and roles was real as performance, but it was also armor. And armor gets heavy when a whole career depends on nobody seeing the man underneath. Tab Hunter. He looked like Hollywood's safest fantasy. Blonde, athletic, polite, horse-loving, and impossibly clean-cut, he became a Warner Brothers heartthrob, starred in films like Battle Cry, Gunman's Walk, and Damn Yankees, and even scored a #1 hit with Young Love. That mix of cowboy energy and boy-next-door innocence made him wildly marketable. But Hunter later admitted he had been living two lives. In his memoir, he came out publicly as gay and described an era when studios and fan magazines built fake romance narratives around stars to keep them marketable. He was also arrested in 1955 at what newspapers called a pajama party, a scandal that could have wrecked him if the image machine had not moved quickly to contain the damage. According to later accounts, his public pairings with actresses such as Natalie Wood were largely publicity. Privately, he had relationships with men, including Anthony Perkins, but that life had to remain hidden while the all-American image kept paying the bills. He eventually told the story on his own terms, which is part of why his legacy feels unusually tender. It is not just about scandal. It is about a man who understood that fame could love his face while rejecting his truth. Randolph Scott. He represented the classical Western ideal before many television cowboys even arrived. Over a career spanning more than 100 films, with more than 60 Westerns, he became a stoic face of frontier masculinity, especially in the lean, psychologically tough Westerns he made in the 1950s. He projected discipline, restraint, and a weathered calm that made him feel almost untouchable. But Scott's private life has long been shadowed by one of old Hollywood's most discussed relationships. His years living with Cary Grant in a Santa Monica beach house and later homes nearby. Their closeness was openly photographed and jokingly written about in fan coverage, yet never directly explained in public. Some writers and biographers have treated it as evidence of a romance. Others have argued that certainty is impossible. That uncertainty matters. Scott never publicly confirmed being gay, and responsible history has to stop there. Still, the reason the story endures is obvious. Hollywood let the friendship remain visible only because ambiguity was safer than honesty. In a town built on performance, silence became its own form of image control, and Scott's legend was left standing inside that silence, handsome and unexplained. Madison. He was the kind of television cowboy America trusted on sight. After being discovered during World War II leave and promoted heavily for his looks, he became a film actor and then the face of the adventures of Wild Bill Hickok, one of early TV's cleanest frontier heroes. He was handsome, contained, and easy for the industry to package. That wholesome image mattered. Madison's career had been built in the same Hollywood system that specialized in sculpting attractive men into safe fantasies, and his early champion was Agent Henry Wilson, a notorious architect of macho screen identities. Here the record gets much thinner. Unlike Rock Hudson or Tab Hunter, Madison never publicly came out, and there is no solid documentary proof establishing a secret gay life. What exists is later speculation, recurring rumor, and the broader context of a studio culture in which male stars were routinely packaged, shielded, and domesticated for public consumption. So, the honest way to tell Madison's story is this: his cowboy image was real, his fame was real, and the whispers around his private life were never publicly resolved. That unresolved gap is exactly what makes old Hollywood feel haunted, because the silence always sounds deliberate. Rory Calhoun. He did not look like a man built for secrecy. He looked dangerous, weathered, and fully at home in westerns like The Silver Whip and later television work such as The Texan. He also had a genuinely rough past. Before stardom, he had arrests and time in prison, which made his screen toughness feel less manufactured than most. That history gave him outlaw credibility, but it also made him vulnerable. Then Hollywood used that past as currency. In 1955, reports about Calhoun's criminal record surfaced in Confidential, and later accounts tied that exposure to Agent Henry Wilson's frantic effort to protect Rock Hudson from being outed. That part of the story is well known. What is not equally firm is the sexuality rumor layer. Some later Hollywood gossip histories have suggested Calhoun also moved inside that same coded world of studio secrecy, but he never publicly confirmed being gay, and those claims remain unproven. What does feel undeniable is the culture around him. Scandals were traded, buried, or weaponized depending on what protected the bigger asset. Calhoun's story lands hard because it shows how a cowboy star could become leverage inside Hollywood's survival machine, even when the public thought it was just another scandal story. Hardin. He entered television as another polished masculine fantasy. Warner Brothers put him at the center of Bronco, and for a while he looked like the future of the TV Western, square-jawed, athletic, and easy to market. He also married multiple times, reinvented himself repeatedly, and spent years moving through the entertainment world's publicity expectations. That outer life is documented, and it fed the image of a conventional frontier hero. The inner life is much less certain. Hardin never publicly identified as gay, and the claims that his marriages or romances functioned as cover remain speculative. Still, his story fits a recognizable old Hollywood pattern. He was a star built by an industry that expected men in westerns to project uncomplicated heterosexual confidence at all times, whether or not real life was that tidy. So even without firm proof, the fascination around Hardin points to something larger than one actor. It points to a system where masculine branding could become a full-time performance, and where a man could wind up protecting an image so relentlessly that nobody outside the gates knew where the role ended and the fear began. That pressure could turn ordinary companionship, loneliness, even public dating into survival tactics, until the role swallowed the man, and no one outside the studio gates could tell the difference. George Nader. He may be the clearest case on this list after Hudson and Hunter. He had the physique studios loved, won a Golden Globe as a promising new actor, appeared in westerns such as Four Guns to the Border, and spent years being photographed as a full-fledged He-Man lead. He looked like exactly the kind of man the studios thought women should want. But unlike some other stars, his private life eventually came into clearer focus. Nader was not openly gay during his Hollywood career, yet multiple reliable accounts state that he spent decades with his partner Mark Miller, whom he met in 1947. Obituaries and later reporting described them as lifelong partners, and The Guardian noted that Universal even arranged dates with starlets to strengthen Nader's masculine image. When rumors spread in the 1950s, his rise in Hollywood reportedly stalled, and he later found major success in Europe, especially in the Jerry Cotton films made in Germany. That is why his chapter feels especially sad and strangely triumphant. Hollywood may have narrowed his path, but it did not erase the life he built. He seems less like a fallen cowboy myth than a man who quietly chose a truer life once the studio dream stopped pretending to want him. Dale Robertson. He came across as the kind of cowboy who did not need Hollywood polish. He had served in World War II, was wounded in combat, later became the star of Tales of Wells Fargo and Iron Horse, and projected a thoughtful, sturdy masculinity that even his obituaries emphasized. In fact, The Guardian called him the epitome of masculinity. He seemed less like a manufactured idol than a man the genre simply borrowed. But that same reserve helped produce years of speculation around his private life, especially because Robertson guarded it so tightly and spent much of his later life on his Oklahoma ranch. Here again, caution matters. There is no public confirmation that Robertson was gay, and the rumor trail around him is far less documented than it is for Hudson, Hunter, or Nader. So the story is not that we know a hidden truth. The story is that his privacy itself became part of the myth. Old Hollywood trained audiences to mistake silence for certainty when often silence only meant the boundary held. Robertson's chapter feels melancholy because he played men of action while leaving behind a personal life that outsiders could never fully enter, only imagine from a distance. Clint Walker. He was almost too perfect for the genre. At 6'6", with a booming presence and granite features, he became television royalty as Cheyenne Body on Cheyenne, one of the foundational Western hits of the 1950s. His image was size, certainty, and rugged calm. He also had a documented private life that included 3 marriages, a daughter, and a famously guarded temperament. That is where the facts end and the whispers begin. Rumors about Walker's sexuality circulated in later fan talk and modern retro media speculation, but I could not verify a strong contemporary documentary basis for those claims. He never publicly identified as gay, and saying more than that as fact would go too far. Still, Walker belongs in this conversation as an example of how hypermasculinity itself could function like camouflage. In classic Hollywood, the more convincingly a man embodied the frontier ideal, the less likely anyone was to challenge the story being sold. Whether the rumors around Walker were meaningful or not, his legacy shows how powerful the cowboy mask remained once America decided to believe it. That silence protected careers, and sometimes it protected mysteries too. Van Williams. He brought a Texas-bred ease to television masculinity. He grew up on a ranch, was discovered in Hawaii, worked his way into Warner Brothers Television, and became widely known as both Surfside Six's Kenny Madison and later Britt Reed in The Green Hornet. Publicly, his life looked stable and traditional. Marriages, children, property, smart investments, and a retreat from acting into privacy. He seemed to embody the neat, compartmentalized success story Hollywood liked to print. But as with several stars near the edge of this list, the harder claim remains slippery. I found solid sources for his career and family life, but not solid proof that he lived a secretly gay life. What survives instead are later whispers, fan speculation, and the sense that he moved through Hollywood with a carefully compartmentalized public identity. So his section has to be framed honestly. Williams may fit the larger pattern of studio-era image management, but the record does not let us state the rumor as fact. Maybe that is the real point. In old Hollywood, the system trained audiences to trust the photograph, the wife, the smile, and the press release, even when those things revealed almost nothing about the person inside them. They played freedom on-screen, yet some lived with silence and fear off-screen. Could any of these cowboy stars have survived old Hollywood openly? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell for more untold stories.